Good afternoon, everybody. Today is another day of living environment practice problems that we are going to walk through in preparation for our test on ecology, which is due Thursday at 11:59. A reminder that the test has a timer on it. It has a 50-minute timer, so once you open it up, you're not going to be able to pause or do anything other than take that test for 50 minutes. There is also a homework that is due, and the homework will be a grand total of 14 questions, and they will all reveal their answers as soon as you complete the assignment, which is different from normal. And you should use that as a tool to study for the test. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns before we get started? Alright, I'm going to go over the next chunk of practice problems, picking right up from where we left off on Monday of Monday of 2 days ago. The first one we're going to look at here: what two life functions of animals help maintain the water cycle by recycling water back into the environment? We're focusing really on water here, and we want water to leave the animal. So we're looking for which two of these things are going to have water leaving the animal. Digestion is more about getting nutrients into the animal, so it won't be that one. Regulation is about keeping all life functions regulated and continuing to happen, so it's not going to be that one. Moving around is not going to be putting water back into the environment. Growing, reproduction, building new things, right? None of these things are going to put water back into the environment. But respiration, breathing, right? When an animal breathes out, they're breathing out CO2 and some water vapor, so that's going to put water back into the environment. Excretion, when an animal sweats or pees or gets rid of their wastes, right? Some of those wastes are extra water that goes back into the environment, which makes C our correct answer. There is a study test wizard. It's the one that's posted right now. I think it's titled Ecology 2. It's 13, 14, or 15 questions right off the top of my head. I forget. I think it's 14. And if you do it, it will release the answers immediately, which should help you review and study for the test that's due tomorrow at 11:59. Right. Moving over to another practice problem. Right. The bar graph below shows the number of species in 4 pond ecosystems. Based on this information, which ecosystem is the most stable? If we want ecosystem stability, we are focusing on biodiversity, right? Higher biodiversity is going to mean more stability. Biodiversity is based on the number of different species that exist, so if we have one with the most species that exist together, that's going to be the one that is the most stable of our bunch. The study test wizard is a normal homework. It's this week's homework. It's due Sunday at 11:59. on looking at our next practice problem. An aquarium ecosystem is shown below. A community in this aquarium consists of what? Remember, community is all living things. A population is one species. And an ecosystem, if we look at the whole thing, is all living and non-living things. So if we're looking here for the community, we're looking for all the living things in this aquarium. We've got some snails. Nope, that's just a rock. We've got some plants, and we've got some fish, right? All living. The gravel, non-living. The water, non-living, which leaves our only answer as C, right? The fish, the plants, and the snails, the living things, right? We don't care about the water here, right? The water is not a living thing. The gravel, the rocks are not living things, so they are not part of the community. They are part of the ecosystem, right? Which is all 5, right? If we're looking at the ecosystem, we would have fish, plants, snails, gravel, and water. Right? We would add the non-living things if this was a question about the ecosystem. But because it's not, and they're asking us specifically about the community, it's all the living things and none of the non-living things. Moving on to do another practice problem, we've got organisms that live on land rarely compete for blank. Right, so when we're talking about things that organisms compete for, we're talking about how overlapping habitats, how overlapping food sources cause competition. If we have animals that are living around this pond, right, the animals are going to come and compete for the water in this pond, right? So they're going to compete for water. They're going to compete for food, right? They're going to compete for the grass or the other animals that are coming to this pond in order to eat or drink. So they're all going to be competing for food and water. They will be competing for space. Right, we talked about that as a big reason why we want different niches for different organisms. Right, we want organisms that live near the tops of the trees. We want organisms that live on the branches of the trees. We want organisms that live by the roots of the trees, but we don't want multiple that share the same habitat, the same living space. The thing that land organisms are not going to fight for is air. Right, it's not like there's a good pocket of air right here that the animals are going to come and fight over this pocket of air. Right, so because that oxygen is everywhere, it's not a thing that we are going to have competition over. Right, exactly, Filippo, you've got it 100%. Moving on to look at our next question. The diagram below represents a cycling of materials. We have a human giving off X, the plant taking in X and giving off Y, the human taking in Y, giving off X, over and over again. Which row in the chart best shows the substances represented by X and Y? The human giving off oxygen and the plant giving off carbon dioxide. We know that humans need oxygen, so we should have the oxygen coming into them, not coming out. So it's not going to be row 1. the human giving off glucose and the plant giving off oxygen, we know that plants make their own glucose, so they wouldn't be taking the glucose from a human. The human giving off carbon dioxide, the plant taking carbon dioxide and giving off oxygen, the human taking oxygen, giving off carbon dioxide. That looks right. Let's check the last one. The humans giving off amino acids, the plant giving off carbon dioxide, right? We already know that it's not going to be carbon dioxide here. So we are narrowed down to 3, choice C being our only viable answer here. Looking at our next practice problem. Many biotic factors affect individuals in a population. An example of an organism being directly affected by a biotic factor is, right, when we talk about biotic factors, right, we have and this is one of the definitions that we talked about in the very beginning of the unit. Abiotic factors are non-living, whereas biotic factors are living. Right, so we want one that talks about a living thing being affected by another living thing. A chipmunk, living thing, finds a rock pile to use for a home. That's abiotic. So that's not going to work. We want 2 biotic factors. A plant, living thing, is in a dark room, right? Light is non-living. That's an abiotic factor. Again, that's not going to work. A flood, water is abiotic, washes away a maple tree. It's biotic. It's a living thing. Again, we don't want one of each. We want 2 biotic factors. A squirrel, biotic factor, cannot find a mate, another biotic factor. That is going to be our answer here. Right? Biotic factors are living factors. It's other animals, it's other plants. It's not abiotic, which would be the light, the sun, the oxygen, the water, all that. Coming in to look at our next practice problem. The organisms in a pond and the physical factors influencing them best describe. Right, so we're talking about organisms and the physical factors. We're talking about biotic and abiotic factors. Right, so both living and non-living things. If we're looking at that, we're going to look at an entire ecosystem, right? It's the definition of an ecosystem. Moving on to our next practice problem. The diagram below represents the changes over time in an area. Which example is not a natural process that could return a hardwood forest to the grass stage once again? A forest fire caused by a lightning strike, that is natural. The aging and falling of trees, that is natural. A hurricane or a tornado, those things are natural. Clearing the land for agriculture, that's humans. That's not natural. It's going to be our answer. Right? All of these things are going to take our hardwood forest and bring it back to the grasses, but only one of them is not natural. Alright, a food chain is represented below. Grass eaten by rabbit, rabbit eaten by hawk. Structures within the rabbit are formed using chemical energy from the grass. The rabbit eats the grass and takes energy from the grass. Solar energy doesn't come from the grass, it comes from the sun. You're not going to use a heat energy to build things, right? You can't use the energy that you're getting rid of to make things. And the hawk eats the rabbit, not the other way around. So that's going to make all three of these things incorrect. And we're going to go on and look at our next practice problem. In a food web, which type of organism receives energy from the three other types? When we're looking at these, we want one that should be connected to the rest. Producers get their energy from the sun, not carnivores, not herbivores, not decomposers, so it's not producers. Carnivores get their energy from herbivores, right? Snake eats the rabbit. Snake doesn't eat the producer, doesn't eat the decomposer, so it's not going to be here. The herbivore gets its energy from the producer. The decomposer gets its energy from everything else, right? Everything connects the decomposer. The decomposer breaks down all the dead organisms. What structures in the rabbit? Oh, so that's looking at the previous question. Right. Structures within the rabbit. When they're talking about that, they're talking about tissues, organs, organelles, anything that the rabbit has to create. Proteins. Right. So they're just saying the rabbit gets energy to continue being alive, right? Gets energy to continue building and storing things from chemical energy from the grass. Too many? No, not too many. The diagram below represents the interactions that occur between some organisms in an ecosystem, right? We're looking at a food web. Which factor would most likely cause an increase in the number of frogs? So we want frogs to go up. An increase in the number of deer would mean that there's a decrease in the number of trees, and that's where that interaction stops. So that's not going to cause more frogs. If we have a decrease in the amount of grasses, if there's less grass, there's going to be less mice and less crickets, right? Because they have not as much food. The frogs are going to decrease because there's going to be not as much food for the frogs. So that's not going to cause an increase in frogs. So it's not going to be B. If we look at C, an increase in the number of snakes. If there's more snakes, the hawks are going to increase. No, sorry, pause. The hawks are going to focus more on the snakes. They're going to be easier to find, which means that there's going to be more frogs. A decrease in the amount of trees is not going to do anything for the frogs. It's actually the exact same as our blue here. Right, but an increase in the number of snakes means a decrease in the number of mice, means an increase in the number of grasses, means an increase in the number of crickets, means an increase in the number of frogs. Right, it also means that these hawks have another food source. There's going to be more snakes for them to eat, so they can focus more on the snakes than on the frogs, and so the frogs have a chance to grow a little bit in population. With that, I'm going to transition us into tutoring and office hours for about half an hour there. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, come on in to tutoring and office hours. I'll see you there. Have a great day.